The last bit of polish that our chart needs are labels to tell us what the x and y axis represent. For the x-axis, we can intuit that we're talking about donuts, or that we're talking about pastries. For the y-axis, however, we don't really know what these numbers stand for. Well, with the data visualization, you should never just leave it up to your user to intuit what it is you're displaying. You need to be explicit about it. So we'll add labels to the x and y axis. Let's head to the code. Now, within the plot function, we'll head to the bottom where we created the axes, and that's at lines 107 through 120. Just after line 120, we'll create a new line. Now we'll add text to the y-axis. How do we do this? You see, the y-axis was created by using the svg.axis method, and so we wouldn't actually create it by going into that function. And as well, we wouldn't go to lines 117 through 120 and continue the statement. So we need to select the y-axis. How do we do that? Well, the y-axis has a class y-axis. So this.select, and not select all, because we don't want to select all the elements that are labeled this, just one of them. And the selector will be a string.y.axis with no space, and that's critical. So that's selecting any element that has both the class y and axis. What we want to do here is, with that selected, we want to append text. And so now we have appended a text element. Now we'll set the text to display .text, open and close parentheses, and this will be units sold. And then we'll put a semicolon. Save it and head to the chart. And now you can see units sold is near the y-axis. But let's say I wanted to display vertically. I want to rotate it 90 degrees. So let's do it again for this particular label for the y-axis. Go back to the code, and just before the setting of the text, we'll create a new line, and we'll be explicit about some attributes. So .attr, and then we'll set the x attribute and set it to 0. On a new line, .attr, we'll set the y attribute and set it to 0. Now we'll need to rotate the text, and we'll want to do so using a text anchor in the middle. So .style, because we're setting a style property, and that will be text anchor with a dash, and the value for that will be middle. Save it. Let's look at the code. And so you can see the text move over to the left, and that's because the anchor has been set to the middle. Go back to the code, and now we need to set a transform for this particular text element. So .attr, because transform is an attribute, transform, and for the argument, we'll have a string that is translate, open and close parentheses, 0, 0, space, rotate, open parentheses, -90, and close parentheses. Save it and head to the code. And now you can see that we did rotate it 90 degrees. Now we need to center it vertically on the axis. So it'll appear around here. How do we do that? Well, we're going to simply set its top position to be half of the height of the y-axis. The height of the y-axis happens to be the height of the chart. So let's go to the code. And now here, where we typed 0, 0 for translate, we're going to get rid of the second 0, open and close the string, and add some addition signs. We're going to concatenate some values. So we're going to take the height of the chart and divide it by 2. Save it and head back to the browser. When we refresh, we see that it's centered vertically. Now we'll push it to the left by setting the x value for the translate. So we'll get rid of 0 and we'll type -50. This will move it to the left. Negative values move to the left, positive to the right. Save and head to the page, refresh, and there it is. We can see now that it's comfortably a good distance from the labels, but we'll push in the margin in just a moment so that it doesn't hit the boundary of the SVG element. Let's add a label to the x-axis. Go back to the code. Now after this statement, new line, this.select, and we'll select the x-axis, .x.axis, no space. With the x-axis selected, we'll append a text element. We'll set the text for that text element to be donut type and a semicolon at the end. Now before that, new line, we'll explicitly set the x and y just as we did before for the y-axis, so I'm just going to copy and paste. As well, we'll use the same text anchor, copy and paste. Save it and head to the browser, refresh, and now we can see that it's at the very left. So we need to move it so that it is centered to the middle of the chart. And then as well, we need to push it down so that it appears below the labels. Go to the code, and that'll be done via a transform attribute, .attr, transform, and the value will be translate, And we'll start with 0, 0. And now replace the first 0 with an open and closed string, and in the middle, some code. And that will be the width of the chart divided by 2. Save it and head back to the chart, refresh, and now it's centered. So if we want to push it down, we need to set the top value to a positive number, and that's here. Let's push this down 80 pixels. Save it, head to the chart, refresh, and you can barely see it being clipped by the SVG element. Well, when things are clipped by the SVG element, we simply adjust our margins. So that'll be the last thing that we do. Let's head back to the code and scroll up to the declaration of the margins. So now we want to adjust the bottom margin. Let's give it more, 100. And we want to adjust the left margin, so let's give it a value of 80. Save, head back to the chart and refresh. And now we have a really nice looking chart so that we see the type of donut and the amount of units sold on the y-axis.